The scream that tore through the mountain silence on that February morning in 1884 was the kind that made a man's blood run cold. And Tucker Xander heard it clear as church bells, even through the howling wind and thick curtain of snow that had been falling for 3 days straight. He had been tracking a wounded elk through the San Francisco peaks north of Flagstaff when that sound cut through the wilderness, raw and desperate. A woman's voice pleading for mercy that Tucker knew in his gut would not come. His hand went instinctively to the rifle slung across his back as he changed direction, his boots crunching through knee-deep powder, his breath coming in white clouds that dissipated into the gray morning air. Tucker was 26 years old, lean and weathered from years of working cattle drives and hunting game to sell to the mining camps that dotted Arizona territory. He had left his small ranch outside Flagstaff 3 days ago to track game before the worst of the winter storms hit, but the blizzard had come faster than anyone predicted. Now he found himself miles from civilization, his supplies running low, and somewhere ahead through those snow-laden pines, a woman was suffering. He pushed forward, his legs burning with effort as he climbed the steep slope, following the sounds of violence that grew clearer with each yard he covered. When Tucker finally crested the ridge and saw the small hunting cabin nestled against the mountainside, he witnessed a scene that made rage bloom hot in his chest despite the freezing temperature. Through the half-open door, he could see a man, heavy-set and red-faced with fury, standing over a woman who had collapsed against the rough wooden floor. The man's fist was raised, and even from 30 yards away, Tucker could see the blood on the woman's face, the way she held her arms up in a futile attempt to protect herself. Tucker did not hesitate. He charged through the snow, his boots finding purchase on the icy ground through sheer determination. The man inside must have heard his approach because he spun toward the door, his eyes wild with drink and anger. Tucker recognized the look, had seen it too many times in saloons and gambling halls, the look of a man who had lost himself to whiskey and meanness. "Get away from her," Tucker said, his voice deadly calm as he filled the doorway, blocking the weak winter light. He kept his hand near his revolver, though he hoped he would not need to draw it. The cabin was small, barely 15 feet square, with a stone fireplace that held only dying embers and a single window covered with oiled paper that did little to keep out the cold. The man straightened, swaying slightly. He was perhaps 40 years old, with a thick, dark beard and eyes that held no remorse. "This is my wife," he snarled, the words slurred. "Ain't none of your concern what happens between a man and his woman." Tucker's eyes flicked to the woman on the floor. She was younger than her husband, perhaps 23 or 24, with auburn hair that had come loose from its pins and now hung in tangled waves around her face. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, and blood trickled from her split lip and a cut above her eyebrow. But it was her eyes that struck Tucker most, brown eyes that held fear and pain but also something else, a fierce determination not to give up even when everything seemed lost. "I am making it my concern," Tucker said quietly. He took a step into the cabin, and the man backed up, reaching for something behind him. Tucker's hand moved like lightning, pulling his Colt revolver and aiming it steady at the man's chest. "Do not test me. I have been 3 days in the cold tracking game, and my patience is worn thin." The woman's husband froze, his hand hovering near a hunting knife that lay on the rough wooden table. For a long moment, the three of them formed a frozen tableau, the only sound the wind howling outside and the woman's labored breathing. Then the man's face twisted into something ugly, and he lunged not for the knife but for the woman herself, grabbing her by the hair and yanking her up to use as a shield. She cried out in pain, and Tucker saw red. He could not risk a shot with the woman in the way, so he did what his father had taught him years ago on their ranch in Texas. He threw himself forward in a tackle that caught the man around the waist, using his momentum and the element of surprise to drive them both away from the woman. They crashed into the table, splintering the old wood, and then they were on the floor, fists flying. Tucker had fought plenty of times, in saloons and in cattle camps where men settled disputes with their hands, but this was different. This man fought with the desperation of someone who knew he was in the wrong, who knew that if he lost this fight, he would lose everything. He fought dirty, going for Tucker's eyes, trying to bite when Tucker pinned his arms. But Tucker was younger, stronger, and most importantly, sober. He landed a solid punch to the man's jaw that snapped his head back, followed by another to his ribs that drove the air from his lungs. The fight ended when Tucker got his forearm across the man's throat and pressed down just hard enough to make his point. "You are going to gather whatever is yours and walk out of here," Tucker said, his voice low and dangerous. "You are going to go down this mountain, and you are never going to come near her again. Because if you do, if I ever hear that you have laid another hand on her, I will hunt you down and make you regret the day you were born. Do you understand me?" The man's face had gone purple, and he nodded frantically. Tucker released him and stood, keeping his hand near his gun. The man scrambled to his feet, wheezing and coughing, shooting venomous looks at both Tucker and the woman who now stood pressed against the far wall, her hand over her mouth. "You cannot just take a man's wife," the husband spat, but there was fear in his voice now, fear that had replaced the earlier bravado. "I am not taking anything," Tucker said coldly. "I am giving her a choice which is more than you ever did. Now get out." The man grabbed his coat and hat from a peg near the door, and for a moment, Tucker thought he would try something stupid. But whatever the man saw in Tucker's eyes made him think better of it. He stumbled out into the snow, turning back only once to look at the woman. "You will regret this, Eleanor," he said, and then he was gone, swallowed by the white curtain of falling snow. Tucker watched until the man's figure disappeared into the trees. Then he turned to the woman. She had slid down the wall into a sitting position, her arms wrapped around herself, shaking from cold or shock or both. He approached her slowly, the way he would approach a wounded animal, not wanting to frighten her further. "My name is Tucker Xander," he said gently, crouching down a few feet away from her. "Are you hurt badly? Can you stand?" She looked up at him, and he saw tears tracking through the blood and dirt on her face. "Why did you help me?" she whispered. "You do not even know me." "Reckon I do not need to know someone to know they need help," Tucker replied. He pulled a bandana from his pocket, one that was relatively clean, and offered it to her. "What is your name?" "Eleanor," she said, taking the cloth with trembling fingers and pressing it to her bleeding lip. "Eleanor Johnson. I was Eleanor Johnson before I married him, before I made the biggest mistake of my life." Tucker felt something shift in his chest at the sound of her name, at the way she said it with such bitter regret. "How long has he been hurting you?" he asked, though he was not sure he wanted to know the answer. Eleanor's eyes dropped to the floor. "Since 3 months after we married. 2 years now. He was kind at first, or I thought he was. He ran a freight business in Flagstaff, seemed prosperous and respectable. My father had died the year before, and I was working as a seamstress, barely making enough to keep a room at the boarding house. When Marcus came calling, when he asked me to marry him, I thought my prayers had been answered." She laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. "Turns out I should have been more specific in my prayers." Tucker stood and went to the fireplace, adding wood from the small stack beside it. The fire caught quickly, and warmth began to spread through the cabin. He could see now how sparse the place was, how little food sat on the shelves, how the woman's dress, though it had once been fine, was now patched and worn. "Why did he bring you up here?" he asked. "He said we were going to trap Beaver, that we would make enough money to save his failing business," Eleanor said, standing slowly, wincing as she did. Tucker could see bruises on her arms, purple and yellow marks that spoke of earlier violence, but there was no trapping equipment. "He just wanted to get me away from town, away from anyone who might hear when he drank and when he got angry. He has been drinking more and more lately, and the anger comes faster now." Tucker felt his jaw clench. He had known men like Marcus Johnson, had seen what they could do to the people unlucky enough to be tied to them. "Well, he is gone now," he said. "And I meant what I said. He comes back, I will handle it." Eleanor moved closer to the fire, holding her hands out to the warmth. In the better light, Tucker could see that she was lovely, even with the injuries marring her face. She had delicate features, a straight nose, and a mouth that he suspected smiled often when it was not split and bleeding. Her dress, though worn, showed a trim figure, and there was something in the way she held herself, even now, that spoke of inner strength. "Where were you headed before you heard me?" she asked, glancing at him. "You are far from any town to be out in this storm." "I have a small ranch outside Flagstaff," Tucker explained. "Raise some cattle, break horses, hunt game to sell when money gets tight. I came up here tracking an elk, got caught when the storm came in harder than expected. I have a camp about 2 miles south of here." He paused, considering. "But I think we should stay here tonight. That storm is getting worse and you need rest. Tomorrow, when it clears, I will take you back to Flagstaff." Eleanor nodded, then swayed on her feet. Tucker moved quickly, catching her before she fell. She was lighter than he expected, and he could feel her trembling against him. "When did you last eat?" he asked, guiding her to sit on the single chair that had survived the fight. "Yesterday morning," she admitted. "Marcus said I was getting too mouthy, that I did not deserve supper." Anger flared in Tucker again, but he pushed it down. Getting angry would not help her now. Instead, he went to his pack, which he had dropped by the door, and pulled out some dried venison and hardtack. It was not much, but it was food. He also had a small tin pot, which he filled with snow and set near the fire to melt. When it was warm, he added some herbs he carried for tea and brought it to her along with the food. Eleanor ate slowly, as if she was not quite sure the food was real. Tucker busied himself checking the cabin, securing the door with a heavy wooden bar he found leaning in the corner, making sure the window was as sealed as possible against the cold. Outside, he could hear the wind picking up, howling like a living thing through the peaks. "That storm is going to get bad," he said, returning to the fire. He had found a few blankets in a corner and he shook them out, checking for vermin before deeming them acceptable. "Might be stuck here more than one night." "I am sorry," Eleanor said softly. "You would be safe at your own camp if not for me." Tucker shook his head. "Do not apologize for being saved," he said firmly. He settled on the floor near the fire, keeping a respectful distance from her. "Besides, this cabin is sturdier than my lean-to. We will be warmer here." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm rage outside. Tucker found himself watching Eleanor when he thought she was not looking, noticing the way the firelight caught in her auburn hair, the way her hands, despite their trembling, moved with a kind of grace as she sipped the tea. He wondered what her life had been like before Marcus Johnson, what dreams she had held before they were beaten out of her. "Why are you not married?" Eleanor asked suddenly, surprising him. "A man like you with land and honest work. Seems like you would have women lining up." Tucker felt his ears warm, and he was grateful for the dim light. "Never found the right woman, I suppose," he said. "My parents died 5 years back. Fever took them both within a week of each other. After that, I just focused on keeping the ranch going, on surviving. Did not leave much time for courting. I am sorry about your parents, Eleanor said, and he could hear the genuine sympathy in her voice. That must have been hard, losing them both like that. It was, Tucker admitted. But it taught me that life is short, that you have to hold on to the good things when you find them. He looked at her directly then. It also taught me that some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds are against you. Eleanor held his gaze for a long moment, and Tucker saw something shift in her expression, a softening that had not been there before. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for fighting for me today. I had forgotten what it felt like to have someone on my side." "You have someone on your side now," Tucker said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. He barely knew this woman, had met her only hours ago, but something about her called to him in a way he could not explain. Maybe it was her courage in the face of such cruelty, or the way she still had kindness in her eyes despite everything she had endured. Or maybe it was something simpler, something that his heart recognized even if his mind did not understand it yet. The storm raged on through the night, wind screaming around the cabin and snow piling up against the walls. Tucker kept the fire going, using the last of the wood they had, and then venturing out briefly to grab more from a covered pile he found behind the cabin. When he came back in, covered in snow and shivering, Eleanor had arranged the blankets near the fire, creating 2 separate sleeping areas with careful propriety. "You should rest," Tucker said, shaking the snow from his coat. "You have been through a lot today." "So have you," Eleanor replied. She had cleaned the blood from her face using some of the warm water, and while the cuts and bruises were still visible, she looked more like herself now. "You saved my life today, Tucker Xander. I will not forget that." Tucker settled onto his blankets, his rifle within easy reach, though he did not think Marcus would be foolish enough to come back in this storm. "Just doing what anyone decent would do," he said. "No," Eleanor said firmly. "Not anyone. Most people would have kept walking, would have told themselves it was not their business. But you did not. You risked your life to help a stranger." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was soft. "You are a good man." Tucker did not know what to say to that, so he simply nodded and closed his eyes, listening to the fire crackle and the storm howl. But sleep was a long time coming because he could not stop thinking about the woman lying just a few feet away, about the bruises on her skin and the strength in her eyes, about the way his world had shifted on its axis the moment he heard her scream. The storm blew itself out by midday the next day, leaving the world buried under 3 feet of fresh snow that sparkled blinding white in the sudden sunshine. Tucker woke to find Eleanor already up, stirring something in the pot over the fire. She had found some flour and salt in the cabin's meager stores and had made a simple batter for fry cakes. "I hope you do not mind," she said when she saw him watching. "I needed to do something useful, and we both need to eat before we travel." Tucker sat up, marveling at her resilience. After everything she had been through, she was thinking about taking care of him. "Smells good," he said honestly. His stomach growled in agreement, reminding him that he had given most of his food to her the night before. They ate in companionable silence, and then Tucker went outside to assess the situation. The snow was deep, but not impassable. If they moved slowly and carefully, they could make it to his camp, and from there down to lower elevations where travel would be easier. He had snowshoes in his pack, and while he only had 1 pair, he could break trail for Eleanor to follow. "We should leave soon," he said, coming back inside. "The weather is clear now, but that could change fast this time of year." Eleanor nodded and began gathering the few personal items she had in the cabin: a brush for her hair, a small locket that she slipped into her pocket, a worn Bible that looked like it had belonged to someone she loved. Tucker noticed that she left everything that might have belonged to Marcus, taking only what was clearly hers. The journey down the mountain was slow and exhausting. Tucker broke trail, his legs burning with effort as he pushed through the deep snow. Behind him, Eleanor followed in his footsteps, her skirts wet and heavy, her breath coming in gasps. But she never complained, never asked to stop longer than necessary. Tucker found himself admiring her grit, the way she pushed forward even when he could see the pain in her face from her injuries. They reached his camp by late afternoon, and Tucker quickly built up the fire he had banked before he left. His lean-to was still standing, protected by the thick pine trees he had built it under. He had more supplies here, including coffee and beans and bacon, and he set about making a proper meal while Eleanor warmed herself by the fire. "Tomorrow we will head to Flagstaff," Tucker said as they ate. "It is about a day's walk from here, maybe a little more with the snow." "You have people there. Someone you can stay with." Eleanor's face fell. "The boarding house where I lived before, Mrs. Patterson, who runs it, she might take me back. But I do not have money for rent, not until I can start sewing again and build up clients." She looked at him, worry clear in her eyes. Marcus will be in Flagstaff. What if he causes trouble? Tucker had been thinking about that. "We will go to the marshal first thing. You will tell him what happened and I will back you up. Arizona territory has laws against wife beating, even if they are not enforced as much as they should be. At the very least, we can get the marshal to warn him off." "And if that does not work?" Eleanor asked quietly. "Then he will have to deal with me," Tucker said, and there was steel in his voice that made Eleanor believe him. They spent another night camped on the mountain, sleeping on opposite sides of the fire as propriety demanded, though Tucker found himself wishing things were different. He barely knew this woman, he reminded himself. It was too soon to be feeling what he was feeling, this protective tenderness, this desire to know everything about her. But his heart seemed to have its own ideas, and as he lay there watching the stars through the pine branches, he acknowledged to himself that he was falling for Eleanor Johnson, falling hard and fast in a way he had never experienced before. The next morning dawned clear and cold, perfect weather for traveling. They packed up camp and began the long trek to Flagstaff, following game trails when they could, breaking through snow when they had to. Tucker told Eleanor stories about his ranch, about the horses he had trained and the cattle he raised. She, in turn, told him about her life before Marcus, about growing up in Missouri and coming west after her mother died, following her father who had dreams of striking it rich in the silver mines. "He never found silver," Eleanor said as they walked, "but he found work as an assayer and we were happy for a few years. Then he got sick, pneumonia they said, and he was gone in less than a week. I was 20 years old and alone in a territory I barely knew." She paused, stepping carefully over a fallen log. "That is when Marcus started coming around. He seemed so solid, so respectable. I thought I was being smart, practical. I thought I was choosing security." "You could not have known what he was really like," Tucker said gently. "Men like that, they are good at hiding their true nature until it is too late." "Still," Eleanor said, "I should have seen the signs. The way he talked about his first wife, always blaming her for their problems. The way he drank too much even when we were courting. I just did not want to see it because I was scared of being alone." Tucker stopped walking and turned to face her. "Eleanor, listen to me. What he did to you, that is not your fault. You hear me? You did not cause it, you did not deserve it, and you should not carry shame for his sins." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes, and she nodded, unable to speak. Tucker wanted desperately to pull her into his arms, to offer comfort through touch, but he held back, unsure if his embrace would be welcome. Instead, He simply stood there, letting her know through his presence that she was not alone anymore. They reached Flagstaff as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The town was bustling even in the cold, with freight wagons rumbling down the main street and cowboys from the nearby ranches filling the saloons. Tucker led Eleanor straight to the marshal's office, a small wooden building near the center of town. Marshal Tom Hendricks was a grizzled man in his 50s who had been keeping the peace in Flagstaff for 10 years. He listened carefully as Eleanor told her story, his expression growing darker with each detail. Tucker confirmed everything, adding what he had witnessed at the cabin. "Marcus Johnson," the marshal said when they were done, leaning back in his chair. "I know him. His freight business has been failing, heard he has been drinking heavy. Never thought he was the type to beat his wife, but then again, you never really know with some men." He looked at Eleanor with sympathy. "I am sorry this happened to you, Mrs. Johnson. I will have a talk with Marcus, make it clear that he is not to come near you. If he does, if he so much as looks at you wrong, you come straight to me." "Thank you, Marshal," Eleanor said softly. "What about her things?" Tucker asked. "She has belongings at the house she shared with Marcus. She should be able to get them." The marshal nodded. "I will go with her tomorrow to collect her possessions. Marcus will not try anything with me there." He paused, studying Tucker with sharp eyes. "You planning on sticking around, Xander?" "Yes, sir," Tucker said firmly. "I am not leaving until I know she is safe." The marshal nodded approvingly. "Good man. Now about a place for Mrs. Johnson to stay." "I will go to Mrs. Patterson's boarding house," Eleanor said. "She knew me before. Might extend credit until I can pay." Tucker frowned. He did not like the idea of Eleanor being in town where Marcus could find her, even with the marshal's warning. But he also knew that Eleanor had few options, and he could not very well suggest she come stay at his ranch, not without compromising her reputation beyond repair. They left the marshal's office as full darkness fell, and Tucker walked Eleanor to the boarding house, a tidy 2-story building on the edge of town. Mrs. Patterson, a stout woman with kind eyes, opened the door and immediately pulled Eleanor into a hug when she saw her face. "My dear girl," she exclaimed. "What has happened to you?" Eleanor explained briefly, and Mrs. Patterson's face hardened. "That no-good snake," she said. "I never did trust him. Of course you can stay here, Eleanor. We will work out the rent later. Right now you need rest and safety." Tucker felt relief wash over him. "Thank you, madam," he said. "I appreciate you taking care of her." Mrs. Patterson looked between Tucker and Eleanor, and something knowing appeared in her eyes. "And who might you be, young man?" "Tucker Xander, madam. I have a ranch north of here." "I am the one who found Eleanor on the mountain." "Well, Mr. Xander, I suspect Eleanor owes you her life," Mrs. Patterson said. "Come by for supper tomorrow evening. It is the least I can do to thank you properly." Tucker agreed and said goodbye to Eleanor, their eyes meeting for a long moment before he forced himself to turn away. He had a room at a cheap hotel near the livery where he sometimes stayed when he came to town, and he headed there now, his mind full of Eleanor Johnson and the strange, powerful feelings she stirred in him. Over the next few days, Tucker found excuses to stay in Flagstaff. He sold the elk he had been tracking before the storm, using the money to buy supplies he did not really need. He helped the marshal escort Eleanor to the house she had shared with Marcus, standing guard while she gathered her few possessions. Marcus was not there, and the neighbors said he had been drinking at the saloon for 2 days straight. Tucker finally encountered Marcus on the 4th day outside the general store. The man was drunk, swaying on his feet, his eyes bloodshot and mean. "You," Marcus snarled, pointing at Tucker. "You are the one who took my wife." Tucker remained calm, very aware of the gun on his hip and the people watching from nearby. "I did not take anyone. I stopped you from beating a woman to death. There is a difference." Marcus took a step forward, and Tucker saw his hand move toward his own weapon. But before anything could happen, Marshal Hendricks appeared as if from nowhere, stepping between them. "That is enough, Johnson," the marshal said firmly. "I told you to stay away from Eleanor and from anyone helping her. Now get on home before I throw you in a cell to sober up." Marcus glared at them both but eventually stumbled away, muttering threats under his breath. The marshal turned to Tucker. "He is getting worse. I have heard he has been talking wild in the saloons, saying he is going to get his wife back, going to teach her a lesson." "You watch yourself, Xander." Tucker nodded, but inside he was making plans. Eleanor was not safe as long as Marcus was in Flagstaff, drinking and stewing in his anger and humiliation. Something had to change. That evening, Tucker sat with Eleanor on the porch of Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, watching the sun set over the San Francisco peaks. She had been working with Mrs. Patterson, helping with cooking and cleaning to earn her keep, and Tucker could see the toll the past few days had taken on her. The bruises on her face were fading to yellow, but there were dark circles under her eyes, and she startled at every loud noise. "I ran into Marcus today," Tucker said gently, and felt Eleanor tense beside him. "The marshal was there and nothing happened, but Eleanor, I am worried about you staying here. Marcus is drinking heavy and talking wild." "I know," Eleanor said quietly. "Mrs. Patterson told me he has been asking around about me, trying to find out my schedule. I am scared, Tucker. I thought getting away from him would be the end of it, but it feels like it is never going to end." Tucker took a deep breath, knowing what he was about to say would change everything. "Come to my ranch," he said. "It is 10 miles out of town, far enough that Marcus would not just stumble across you. You would be safe there, and you could help me with the work. I need someone to help with the cooking and the chickens, with keeping the house. It would be a job, Eleanor, honest work with honest pay." Eleanor turned to look at him, her brown eyes wide. "Tucker, I cannot do that. People would talk. A single woman living on a ranch with a single man, it would ruin what is left of my reputation." "Not if we married," Tucker said, the words coming out before he could second-guess them. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a week. But Eleanor, I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. You are brave and kind and strong, and I want to protect you, to give you a safe place to heal and grow. I am not asking you to love me right away. I am just asking you to let me take care of you, to give us a chance to see what we could be together." Eleanor stared at him, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Tucker plowed on, needing to say it all before he lost his nerve. "I know I am not much of a catch. My ranch is small and the work is hard, but I promise you, Eleanor, I will never raise a hand to you. I will never belittle you or hurt you or make you feel small. I will respect you and care for you and do everything in my power to make you happy. That is my vow, whether you marry me or not." Tears were streaming down Eleanor's face now, and Tucker felt his heart sink, thinking he had pushed too hard, asked too much too soon. But then she was reaching for his hand, holding it tight between both of hers. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Tucker, I will marry you." Joy exploded in Tucker's chest, bright and fierce. He wanted to shout, to pick Eleanor up and spin her around, but he settled for raising her hand to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "You will not regret this," he promised. "I will spend every day proving that I am worthy of your trust." "You already have," Eleanor said, smiling through her tears. "You saved my life, Tucker. You saw me at my worst, at my most broken and helpless, and you did not turn away. You treated me with kindness and respect when I had forgotten what those things felt like. I do not know if I love you yet, but I think I could. I think I want to." They were married 3 days later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Flagstaff. Mrs. Patterson and Marshall Hendricks served as witnesses, and the preacher spoke about love and commitment and second chances. Eleanor wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Patterson had altered for her, and Tucker wore his best shirt and trousers, his hair slicked back and his boots polished to a shine. Marcus showed up drunk halfway through the ceremony, shouting that Eleanor was still his wife, that Tucker had stolen what belonged to him. But Marshall Hendricks was ready, and he hauled Marcus out of the church with the help of 2 deputies, throwing him in a cell to cool off. The ceremony continued, and when the preacher said Tucker could kiss his bride, Tucker leaned in carefully, mindful of the cut that was still healing on her lip, and pressed the gentlest of kisses to her mouth. They spent their wedding night at the hotel, in a room that Tucker had paid extra to have cleaned and fitted with fresh linens. He was nervous, unsure how to proceed given everything Eleanor had been through. But she came to him in the darkness, her hand finding his, and whispered that she trusted him, that she wanted to start this new life fully as his wife. Tucker was gentle, patient, taking his time to show Eleanor that touch could be tender, that intimacy could be about giving pleasure rather than taking it. And when she fell asleep in his arms afterward, her head on his chest and her breathing deep and even, Tucker knew that he had been right to follow his heart, to take this leap of faith with a woman he barely knew but already could not imagine living without. They moved to Tucker's ranch the next day, loading Eleanor's few possessions into the wagon along with supplies they had bought in town. The ranch was everything Tucker had described, a small wooden house with a good stone fireplace, a barn for the horses and cattle, a chicken coop, and pastures that stretched toward the distant mountains. It was remote and isolated, but Eleanor found that she did not mind. After years of living in fear, the silence and solitude felt like a gift. Over the following weeks and months, they settled into the rhythm of ranch life. Tucker taught Eleanor to ride, first on his gentle mare, and then on a spirited pony he bought for her in town. She learned to help with the cattle, to mend fences and break ice on the water troughs in winter. In return, she transformed the house into a home, hanging curtains she sewed from fabric bought with money she earned selling eggs in town, planting a garden that would provide vegetables through the summer, cooking meals that made Tucker close his eyes in pleasure. But more than the physical work, they learned each other. Tucker learned that Eleanor loved to raid, that she had a quick wit and a dry sense of humor that emerged as she healed. Eleanor learned that Tucker was quieter than she first thought, a man who expressed his feelings through actions rather than words, who would wake early to make her coffee before starting the day's work, who would leave wildflowers on the table for her to find. And slowly, carefully, they fell in love. It was not the dramatic, all-consuming passion of dime novels. Instead, it grew like a seedling, putting down roots through the spring and strengthening through the summer. It was in the way Tucker would reach for her hand when they sat on the porch watching the sunset, in the way Eleanor would touch his shoulder when she passed him at the table, in the stolen kisses that grew less tentative and more passionate as the months went by. Marshall Hendricks came by one day in August with news. Marcus Johnson had left Flagstaff, headed to California supposedly, chasing some rumor of gold. He owed money all over town and had slipped away in the night to avoid his debts. "Figured you would want to know," the marshal said, accepting a cup of coffee from Eleanor. "Means you can stop looking over your shoulder, Mrs. Xander." After the marshal left, Tucker found Eleanor in the garden, kneeling among the tomato plants. She was crying, but when he knelt beside her, she was smiling too. "I am free," she said wonderingly, really, truly free of him. Tucker pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "You were always free," he said, "from the moment I helped you out of that cabin." But I am glad you know it now, glad you feel it." That night, they made love with a passion and joy that had been building for months, and Eleanor whispered that she loved him, that she had been falling for him since the moment he crashed through that cabin door like an avenging angel. Tucker said the words back, his voice rough with emotion, and knew that he had found what he had been searching for all his life without even knowing he was looking. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts, and Tucker was able to buy more cattle, to expand the pastures, and even hire a hand to help with the heavy work. Eleanor's sewing business grew as word spread of her skill, and women from Flagstaff and the surrounding ranches would bring her fabric and patterns, trusting her to create dresses and shirts and quilts. 2 years after their wedding, Eleanor gave birth to a son they named Thomas Jackson Xander, a healthy baby boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's auburn hair. Tucker cried when he held his son for the first time, overcome with the perfection of the small life he and Eleanor had created together. 3 years after Thomas came a daughter, Rose, who had Eleanor's delicate features and Tucker's stubborn determination. And 2 years after Rose came another son, James, who was quiet and thoughtful from the moment he was born. Life on the ranch was not always easy. There were droughts and harsh winters, times when money was tight and work was endless. But through it all, Tucker and Eleanor had each other, a partnership built on trust and respect, and a love that had been forged in hardship and had only grown stronger with time. On their 10th anniversary, Tucker took Eleanor back up into the San Francisco peaks, back to where their story had begun. The old hunting cabin was still there, weathered and empty, and they stood together looking at it, remembering the terrified woman and the determined cowboy who had found each other on a snowy mountain. "You ever regret it?" Tucker asked, his arm around Eleanor's waist. "Marrying me so quickly, taking a chance on someone you barely knew." Eleanor turned to look at him, her brown eyes clear and bright. The scars from her injuries had long since faded, leaving only the faintest of marks, but the strength that had gotten her through that dark time had remained, had become part of the woman she was now. "Not for a single second," she said firmly. "You gave me back my life, Tucker. You gave me safety and respect and love. You gave me our children and our home and a future I never thought I would have. How could I ever regret that?" Tucker kissed her then, deep and long, pouring everything he felt into that kiss. When they finally pulled apart, Eleanor was smiling, and Tucker felt his heart, as it always did when he looked at her, expand with joy and gratitude. They rode back to the ranch as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple. Their children would be waiting for them, Thomas probably reading in the loft, Rose helping with supper, James playing with the barn cats. The life they had built together, the family they had created, was everything Tucker had never known he wanted, and everything Eleanor had dreamed of in her darkest moments. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Tucker and Eleanor sat on their porch, Eleanor's head resting on Tucker's shoulder, his arm around her waist. The stars blazed overhead, brilliant and infinite, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the moon. "I love you, Eleanor Xander," Tucker said softly. "I love you too, Tucker Xander," Eleanor replied, and they sat there together. Two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, who had built a life from the ashes of pain and fear, who had proven that love could heal even the deepest wounds. Years continued to pass in the way they do in happy lives, marked not by dramatic events, but by the gentle accumulation of joy and contentment. Tucker and Eleanor watched their children grow, Thomas becoming a steady, reliable young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Rose grew into a spirited young woman with her mother's gift for sewing and her father's determination. James, the quiet one, surprised everyone by developing a talent for drawing, filling pages with sketches of the ranch, the mountains, his family. Tucker's hair began to show silver at the temples, and Eleanor found laugh lines appearing around her eyes, marks of years filled with smiles and happiness. They expanded the house, adding rooms for the growing children, a proper sewing room for Eleanor where she could work on her commissions, and a larger porch where they could sit on summer evenings and watch the sunset paint the peaks in colors that never failed to take their breath away. The story of how they met, how Tucker had climbed through snow to save Eleanor from her abusive husband, became a family legend, one that the children begged to hear over and over. Tucker always downplayed his role, but Eleanor would not let him. "Your father is a hero," she would tell the children. "He saved my life and gave me all of you. Never forget that true courage is not about being fearless, but about doing what is right even when you are afraid." Marshal Hendricks retired eventually, and the new marshal was a young man who knew Tucker and Eleanor only as the respected couple from the Xander ranch, people known for their kindness and their strong marriage. The story of Eleanor's first marriage faded from public memory, though Eleanor never forgot the lessons she had learned from those dark years. She made it her mission to help other women in similar situations, quietly offering assistance and refuge when needed, working with the church to establish a fund for women and children fleeing dangerous homes. Tucker supported her in this as he supported her in everything, understanding that Eleanor's compassion came from her own suffering, that helping others heal helped her heal too. Together, they made a difference in their community, not through grand gestures but through quiet acts of kindness and generosity. When Thomas turned 18, Tucker deeded him a portion of the ranch, recognizing that his son was ready to begin building his own life. Thomas built a small house on the far edge of the property, and when he married a sweet-natured girl from Flagstaff, Tucker and Eleanor welcomed her into the family with open arms, remembering what it was like to be young and starting out. Rose chose a different path, moving to Phoenix to open a dress shop with her mother's financial backing and her father's blessing. She wrote long letters home, filled with descriptions of city life and the success of her business, and Tucker and Eleanor read every word with pride. James, their quiet youngest, decided to attend a school in San Francisco to study art, a decision that surprised everyone but made perfect sense when they thought about it. He promised to return to Arizona to paint the landscapes he loved, and Tucker and Eleanor believed him, knowing that the ranch and the mountains were in his blood just as they were in theirs. On their 25th anniversary, Tucker gave Eleanor a gift he had been working on for months, a locket made from silver he had mined himself from a small claim in the hills. Inside, he had placed tiny photographs of their children, images captured by the traveling photographer who had passed through Flagstaff the previous summer. Eleanor cried when she opened it, and Tucker laughed, pulling her into his arms, marveling that he could still make her happy after all these years. "You make me happy every single day," Eleanor said, seeming to read his thoughts as she so often did. "You have given me a life beyond my wildest dreams, Tucker. A real home, a true family, love that never wavers. I am the luckiest woman alive." "I am the lucky one," Tucker argued gently. "You brought light into my life, Eleanor. Before you, I was just going through the motions, working and surviving but not really living. You taught me what it means to love someone, to build a life with a partner, to be part of something bigger than myself." They renewed their vows that day, in a small ceremony on the ranch with their children and grandchildren present. Thomas had 2 little ones now, A boy and a girl who called Tucker and Eleanor Grandpa and Grandma and brought chaos and joy wherever they went. The preacher who had married them 25 years ago had long since passed, but the new preacher spoke about enduring love, about commitment through good times and bad, about the grace of second chances. As Tucker and Eleanor stood there, hands clasped, reciting the same vows they had spoken in that church in Flagstaff all those years ago, Tucker thought back to that snowy day in the mountains, to the scream that had changed both of their lives forever. He thought about the choices he had made, the decision to help a stranger, to offer marriage to a woman he barely knew, to take a risk on love when everything logical said it was too soon, too fast, too uncertain. But standing there with Eleanor, with their children and grandchildren surrounding them, with the evidence of the beautiful life they had built together all around him, Tucker knew that he would make the same choices again in a heartbeat. Some things were worth the risk. Some things were worth fighting for. And love, true love, was worth everything. The years continued their gentle march forward. Tucker's joints began to ache on cold mornings, and Eleanor's eyesight grew weak enough that she needed spectacles for her sewing. But their love never diminished, never faded into mere companionship or comfortable habit. They still held hands when they walked, still kissed goodnight before sleeping, still looked at each other with the wonder and gratitude of two people who knew how easily they might have missed each other, how different their lives could have been. When they were both in their 60s, an old man came to the ranch, weathered and sick, asking for work. Eleanor recognized him before Tucker did, saw past the years and the ravages of hard living to the man who had once been Marcus Johnson, her first husband. He did not recognize her at first, and when he did, fear flashed in his eyes, fear that she might turn him away, might take revenge for the years of abuse he had inflicted. Eleanor surprised them both by offering him a meal and a place in the barn for the night. Tucker watched, concerned, but he trusted Eleanor's judgment, trusted that she knew what she needed to do. That evening, Marcus left, heading south toward Mexico where he said he had kin, and Eleanor watched him go with something like pity in her eyes. "Are you all right?" Tucker asked, his arm around her shoulders. "I am more than all right," Eleanor said. "I am free. I have been free for decades, but seeing him like that, broken and sick and alone, I realized that I do not carry any anger for him anymore. I pity him because he will never know what we have, what real love and partnership feels like. His choices made him into what he is, and he has to live with that." Tucker held her close, marveling at the wisdom and compassion of the woman he had married, the woman who had survived so much and had come out the other side stronger and kinder. "You are an amazing woman, Eleanor Xander," he said. "And you are an amazing man, Tucker Xander," she replied, turning to kiss him. "My rescuer, my husband, my love." They never saw Marcus again, heard later that he had died in Mexico, alone and unmourned, but by then it did not matter. Eleanor had long since moved past that chapter of her life, had built something so beautiful and lasting that the darkness of her first marriage was nothing more than a distant shadow, a reminder of what she had survived and what she had overcome. Tucker and Eleanor lived well into their 70s, both of them still sharp and active, still managing the ranch with help from Thomas and his family. They spent their days working side by side as they always had, and their evenings on the porch, watching the sun set over the mountains that had brought them together. On a cool evening in late October, as the aspens turned gold and the air smelled of approaching winter, Tucker and Eleanor sat together in their usual spot, a blanket across their laps, their hands intertwined. They had just celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, a milestone marked by a gathering of children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. tiny humans who had no idea of the remarkable love story their great-grandparents embodied. 50 years, Eleanor said softly, wonder in her voice. It seems like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. Best 50 years of my life, Tucker said. His voice was rougher now, aged by time, but the love in it was as clear as it had been on their wedding day. Best decision I ever made, climbing through that snow to you. Best decision I ever made was saying yes when you asked me to marry you, Eleanor replied. She squeezed his hand, feeling the strength still in his grip despite the arthritis that plagued them both. I love you, Tucker Xander. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. I love you too, Eleanor Xander, Tucker said. Always have, always will. They sat there as the stars came out, brilliant against the darkening sky, and talked about their life, about the children and grandchildren they had been blessed with, about the ranch that would continue on through Thomas and his children, about the full, rich life they had built together from the ashes of tragedy and trauma. Neither of them knew how much time they had left, whether it would be years or months or days. But it did not matter because they had lived fully, had loved completely, had created something beautiful and lasting that would continue long after they were gone. They had proven that even the darkest beginnings could lead to the brightest futures, that love could heal the deepest wounds, that courage and compassion could change the course of a life. As Tucker and Eleanor Xander sat together on their porch, watching the stars wheel overhead, they were content. They had found each other against impossible odds, had built a love that had withstood every test, had created a legacy of family and kindness and resilience that would echo through generations. It was more than either of them had ever dreamed possible, and it had all started with a scream in the snow and a cowboy brave enough to answer it. The ranch would continue to thrive long after Tucker and Eleanor passed, tended by their children and grandchildren who had learned from their example what it meant to love truly and build a life of purpose and meaning. The story of the cowboy who climbed through snow to save a woman from her abusive husband would be told and retold, becoming part of family lore, a reminder that heroes were not just found in stories, but could be ordinary people who made extraordinary choices. Tucker and Eleanor's grave markers would eventually stand side by side on a small hill overlooking the ranch, simple stones that bore their names and the dates of their long lives, with a single inscription beneath, "Together forever." And every year on the anniversary of that snowy day in the mountains, their descendants would gather at those graves to remember and to celebrate the love that had started it all, the love that had given life to so many others, the love that proved that second chances were real and happy endings were possible. But that was all in the future. For now, Tucker and Eleanor sat together in the present, alive and in love, watching the stars and counting their blessings. They had been given a gift that cold February day in 1884, the gift of each other, and they had spent every day since then honoring that gift, nurturing it, letting it grow into something magnificent. As the night deepened and the chill grew stronger, Tucker helped Eleanor to her feet, and they walked inside together, arms around each other, moving with the synchronicity of two people who had spent a lifetime learning each other's rhythms. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, but tonight they would sleep in each other's arms, grateful for the life they had built, the love they had found, and the miracle of having crossed paths on that desperate, snowy mountain so many years ago. Their story was one for the ages, a testament to the power of courage, compassion, and enduring love, and it would live on long after they were gone, inspiring others to believe in second chances and the transformative power of love.